So when was the last time you rode a camel? Perhaps you might have had the chance at a state fair or something, a special exhibit, the Eastern world, or if you've been to the Holy Land, you probably had that chance because they told us, I was over there for a whole month in an ecumenical Bible study, Catholics, Protestants, Orthodox. We even had a Muslim who was with us, studying the scriptures, touring the sites we had studied, and they said, everybody while they're over here will want to ride a camel because that's what you put on your Christmas card the next year after you've been to the Holy Land. And sure enough, we were waiting for a bus to come for our tour, and there was a little Bedouin boy standing with a camel. They said, always negotiate the price of the ride before you get up on the camel, is what they told us. So I did, and I got up there. Now, it's a bit unexpected because the camel sits down and you get on, and it stands up with its hind legs first, and you just feel like you're going to roll right off the front of the animal. And then slowly it gets up with the front legs and you kind of come to stability again. Then it walks. And it's not like a horse that will kind of alternate feet. It walks 2 feet, then 2 feet, side to side. And you just do this the whole way. And I only rode it for about 50 yards and I wanted to get off. I don't know how people take these things across the desert like the 3 Magi going to see the birth of Jesus in Bethlehem. It did make for quite a picture. Then they took us to the Negev, the desert in the south of Israel. So some of those barren places on earth. This is the lowest elevation point on earth. The water there, that's the Dead Sea. It's just so deep that the water evaporates and it just kind of leaves behind this salty murk that you can go into. It's supposed to be good for your skin, they tell us. So people are diving in, and you can't really swim in the Dead Sea because it's so salty, it just lifts you right up. You're very buoyant in that. So you jump in, and the first thing that happens is your feet come straight out of the water. And there you are. And you look down, and you notice your belly is doing the same thing. And everybody's like, take my picture. I'm in the Dead Sea. Don't take my picture. I look ridiculous in here. Then they took us out to the really barren part. They said, this is the place, it's known as the place where no man goes. That's what they call it. And there's an old Nabatean trading post there. This was an old trade route that now with transportation is not used anymore. So there's the ruins of a trading village there. And you stand in the middle, this is where the marketplace was. And it's a whole bunch of broken down stones and sand and nothing. And you feel like you're dwelling with the ghosts of humanity. It was a really interesting trip. And then they said, now we're going to go out farther. You sure you know what you're doing here? Well, they took us out into the desert. We walked out there, and we kind of went around a curve in the rock, and there was this cleft. And they said, now we're going to spend an hour of prayer out here in the desert. So the Psalms talk about this. Hide me in the cleft of the rock, right? So that we snuggled in under there. There's about 25 of us. And, we're prayerful people. As a Catholic, you know how to be quiet for an hour. We do holy hours in the Adoration Chapel, so we're there. And we're meditating. We'd heard scriptures in the morning. We're thinking about them. There were desert scriptures that they read to us. And at first, you just notice how hot it is. And it's one of those, it's so hot, and it's dry heat, so it's evaporating the perspiration off your body. You're shriveling up, just being there. And it's hard to breathe the air. But, if you've been in the sauna or the hot tub, your body will adjust over time. And after a while, you settle in. And now you're just a part of the scenery. And it's very still. You do not know stillness until you've spent an hour out in the Negev desert. And every little thing that happens is like, pebbles would break free from a cliffside, and it sounded like rocks. And at one point, about 20 minutes in, an eagle leapt off the cliffside and just soared out beyond our vision. One of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. You just have this sharp focus because nothing is moving out there. And what the desert reveals to you, as it revealed to so many saints, Anthony of Egypt was the first one to go out there, and then all the desert hermits followed him. It's a long tradition. They still do it today. There's still a monastery. It's an Orthodox monastery carved into the side of the cliff near Jericho, and you look at this, and it's this big stone building, and you wonder how it doesn't just fall right off the front of the cliff. It's just embedded right in there. It's amazing. And the desert teaches you that you are not in control. That this world is chaotic and life is fragile, and we need to depend on God at every moment. We have the sense when we're surrounded by our conveniences, that everything's okay, I'm in control. I got my barista machine, I make my latte in the morning, I go off to work, my good old car that gets me there. we are not as safe and secure as we think we are. It's an illusion, friends, the security that we feel. We're blessed to live in a peaceful country, but that hangs on by a thread, and you realize in the desert, someday, I will get sick. My body will grow old. Someday, I will die. And how do you respond in this moment? This is where you are very glad to be in communion with the one true God, because you know that there's a future that lies beyond that point. And that's why it's good for during Lent to hear the kind of readings that we have heard today. St. Peter, in our second reading today, I love this. Peter, he's the first pope, right? And he wrote 2 letters in the New Testament. These are the first papal encyclicals in history. And you recall how he got there, right? Jesus said to him, "You, Simon, are now Peter," which means rock, "and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of the netherworld will not prevail against it." So we are that church, founded on the rock of Peter, the first pope. Still today, we are, with all our imperfections, we are that church, and the gates of the netherworld will not prevail against us. At the end of time, when Jesus comes back in glory, there's only going to be 3 things: God, the devil, and the Catholic Church. That's all that's going to remain. And you want to be on the winning team. Congratulations, friends. You have joined the right team. You're guaranteed to be here until the end of time. Right after that, Jesus explains how it's going to happen. They will take the Son of Man, as he referred to himself, away, and they will crucify him, and he will be put to death. And Peter right away says, "Hold on right there. Wait a minute. What's this talk about dying? Nobody's dying. You just put me in charge of this church. I'm not going to let this happen." He's standing in front of him. There's no way. And you know what Jesus says, right? "Get behind me, because this is what I have to do to save the world." And the guy that he just put at the top of it is suddenly being an obstacle to the whole plan. They reconciled that later on. And what you see in these letters, I encourage you to read them, friends. 2 letters from Peter, they're super short. They're like 6 chapters long. Biblical chapters are like a page and a half. See what Peter wrote after Jesus triumphed over sin and death. And he's looking back in retrospect, and he's totally figured it out. Wow, suffering really does mean something. And we don't necessarily have to try to get out of it. I mentioned this a couple weeks ago in my homily, and I said, don't take the lesson from this that if you're in an abusive relationship that you should stay there. That's not what Scripture is saying. God wants you free, wants you away from an abusive relationship. So do not stay in one of those. But there's suffering that comes our way that we cannot prevent. It's just part of everyday life, aches and pains and trials. And all of that can be put to good use. Peter talks about that in his 2 letters, how we are to do it. St. Paul mentions it most definitively in the letter to the Colossians, chapter 1, verse 24. "Brothers and sisters, I rejoice in my sufferings." You what? Yeah, rejoices in these sufferings because by them, he says, I am filling up what is lacking in the afflictions of Christ. In other words, I'm taking everything I suffer and I'm handing it up to Jesus on the cross, and I'm asking it to make it a part of his sacrifice to turn it into grace. And if you live your life that way, brothers and sisters, there is nothing that can touch you. It's so amazing. Out in the desert, you get this realization that you're not in control. And yet, the more you give over to Jesus, the more you give away, the more control you have. Isn't this divine? Because Jesus will take it and turn it into grace and wisdom and inspiration, and he showers it upon you. And you just, this drives the devil crazy. He's like, I try to tempt this guy and it doesn't work. I throw suffering at him and he hands it to Jesus and it turns it into grace. He's like snapping things over his knee. I can't touch this person. That's the way you want to live your life, brothers and sisters. And Lent challenges us to do that. Do not be afraid of our suffering. Get out of it if we can. If we can't avoid it, hand it up to Jesus on the cross. Turn it into grace. Your life becomes a fountain of grace if you do it this way. It is a tremendous way to live. And so, examine our lives and our consciences during these 40 days. The more we give over to Jesus, the more control we have of our own life, the more secure and certain we feel in what our eternal destiny is. What is it that stands in the way of all that? We know there are things we should be doing that we aren't, and there are a lot of things we should be avoiding and we aren't avoiding them. what is that one thing that does not belong in your life? That's what you should be fasting from for these 40 days of Lent. Let us stand and pray together.